The alarm bells rang across Earth's orbital defense station like the screams of dying metal. Commander Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation window, watching the impossible unfold in the darkness of space. Ships emerged from hyperspace, not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands upon thousands of vessels that made humanity's finest warships look like toys. "Ma'am, we're getting readings on their fleet," Lieutenant Martinez called from his station, his voice shaking. "The computers can't even count them all. There's just too many." Sarah had served in the Terran Defense Fleet for 20 years. She had fought pirates in the outer colonies and defended mining stations from raiders, but nothing had prepared her for this. The alien ships were massive, each one the size of a city. They moved with perfect formation, like a school of metal fish swimming through the void. "Send word to Admiral Torres on Luna Base," Sarah ordered. "Tell him we have first contact and it doesn't look friendly." The aliens had arrived 3 days ago at the edge of human space. They called themselves the Zephyrian Hegemony, and their message was simple: surrender or be destroyed. Humanity had laughed. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They knew war. They knew nothing. Admiral Marcus Torres stood in the command center on Luna Base, watching the tactical display with growing horror. Red dots filled the screen, each one representing a Zephyrian ship. The blue dots showing human forces looked pathetically small in comparison. "Sir, they're demanding we evacuate all military personnel from Earth," his aide reported. "They say this is our final warning." Torres was an old soldier with gray hair and scars from a dozen battles. He had never backed down from a fight. "Send them our answer," he said quietly. "Tell them humans don't surrender." The first Zephyrian attack came without warning. Their weapons were beyond human understanding. Energy beams that could slice through the strongest armor like paper, missiles that turned into swarms of smaller weapons mid-flight, shields that seemed to bend reality itself. Earth's orbital defense platforms, massive installations that had taken decades to build, simply vanished. One moment they were there, bristling with weapons and armor. The next moment they were expanding clouds of gas and metal debris. Commander Chen watched her station die around her. The hull cracked like an eggshell as alien weapons found their mark. Emergency lights flickered as power systems failed. Her crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to send one last message home. "This is Orbital Defense Station 7. She spoke into her communicator as the station shuddered and groaned. "Earth's outer defenses have fallen. The enemy is—" The transmission cut off as the station broke apart. Sarah Chen and her 300 crew members became the first human casualties in a war that would reshape the galaxy. The invasion of Earth lasted 6 hours. Human ships fought bravely. The battleship Normandy rammed a Zephyrian cruiser rather than surrender. The carrier Midway launched every fighter it had before enemy fire tore it in half. Individual pilots flew their burning ships into alien formations in desperate kamikaze runs. None of it mattered. The Zephyrians had conquered 17 galaxies. They had destroyed species that were older and more advanced than humanity. They had weapons that human scientists couldn't even understand, let alone counter. Dr. James Wright watched from his laboratory in the Swiss Alps as alien ships filled the sky above Earth. He was a terraforming engineer, not a soldier, but he had a good mind for understanding how things worked. As he watched the aliens move, he noticed something interesting. Their formations were perfect. Too perfect. Every ship moved exactly where it was supposed to move. Their attacks followed precise patterns. It was like watching a computer program run its code. "Interesting," he muttered to himself as explosions lit up the sky. "They fight like machines." The bombardment of Earth began at sunset. The aliens didn't want to destroy the planet. They wanted to own it. So they targeted military bases, government buildings, and communication centers with surgical precision. But surgical precision, when applied with weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks, still meant millions of deaths. London burned. New York's skyline crumbled. The Kremlin vanished in a flash of alien fire. But the worst was yet to come. Admiral Torres made the hardest decision of his life as he watched Earth's defenses crumble. The evacuation fleets, thousands of civilian ships hastily converted for transport, were humanity's only hope. If they stayed to fight, everyone would die. If they ran, some might live. "All ships, this is Admiral Torres," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Operation Exodus is now in effect. All civilian and military vessels are to evacuate immediately. Do not engage the enemy. Repeat, do not engage. Our only mission now is survival. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the luxury liner Golden Dreams, now packed with refugees from the Europa colonies. She had been a cruise ship captain before the war, taking rich tourists to see the rings of Saturn. Now she was trying to save as many lives as possible. "Sir, my ship can hold maybe 3,000 people safely." She radioed to the evacuation coordinator. "I've got 8,000 on board already." "Pack in as many as you can, Captain. This is our only chance." The evacuation was chaos. Families were separated as ships filled beyond capacity. Children cried for parents they would never see again. Old people were left behind to make room for the young. It was the ugliest side of survival, but it was survival. The Zephyrians watched the human evacuation with something like amusement. Their leader, High Admiral Zarketh, observed the fleeing ships from his command vessel. In his long life, he had conquered hundreds of species. They all followed the same pattern: initial resistance, then acceptance, then integration into the hegemony as servants. "Shall we pursue the fleeing vessels, my lord?" his aide asked. Zarketh waved a dismissive hand. "Let them go. They are scattered and broken. In a generation they will beg to serve us rather than die in the void. It is always the same." As the last evacuation ships jumped to hyperspace, Admiral Torres remained on Luna Base with a skeleton crew. He had volunteers, soldiers who chose to stay behind and buy time for the fleeing civilians. They all knew they were going to die. Torres recorded one final message as Zephyrian troops landed on the lunar surface. "This is Admiral Marcus Torres of the Terran Defense Fleet. Earth has fallen. Luna Base is under attack. But humanity is not dead. We are scattered to the stars, and we will remember what was taken from us. We will remember what we were." The transmission ended as alien soldiers breached the command center. Torres and his remaining crew fought to the last man, buying precious minutes for the evacuation fleet to escape. 3 days later, Earth was completely under Zephyrian control. The aliens established their 472nd kingdom in human space, expecting the usual pattern of conquest and integration. They had done this 1,000 times before. But as the last human ships disappeared into the darkness between stars, something was already different. Most species they conquered simply accepted defeat. Humans, however, were beginning to plan. 20 years had passed since Earth fell, and Captain Elena Vasquez barely recognized the ship she commanded. The Golden Dreams had once been a beautiful cruise liner with polished floors and crystal chandeliers. Now it was a floating city of metal patches, jury-rigged weapons, and the constant smell of recycled air. She stood on the bridge, looking out at the Exodus fleet through the main view screen. Thousands of ships stretched in all directions: cargo haulers, mining vessels, old exploration ships, and converted passenger liners like hers. Each ship told the same story: humans refusing to die. "Captain, we're getting a priority transmission from the Defiance," her communications officer reported. The Defiance had been Admiral Torres's flagship before Earth fell. Now it was a ghost ship held together by stubbornness and spare parts, commanded by Torres's former aide, Commander David Park. The old admiral had died 5 years ago when his artificial heart finally gave out. His last words were, "Keep running, keep fighting." "Put him through," Elena said. Park's weathered face appeared on screen. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiance looked like a scrapyard that someone had tried to organize. "Elena, we've got a problem. Zephyrian hunter squadrons have found our location. 3 battle groups coming from different directions. We have maybe 6 hours before they arrive." Elena felt the familiar knot in her stomach. This was the 4th time this year they'd been found. Each time they had to scatter and run, losing ships that couldn't keep up or broke down during the escape. The fleet grew smaller with every encounter. "How many ships can't jump?" she asked. 47 vessels are showing drive failures or overcrowding issues. That's about 100,000 people. Elena closed her eyes. The same impossible choice they faced every time: abandon the weak or risk everyone. "Send me the list. We'll figure something out." In his workshop aboard the converted mining ship Iron Will, Dr. James Wright stared at the alien technology spread across his workbench. Over the years, the fleet had managed to salvage pieces from destroyed Zephyrian vessels. Wright had become obsessed with understanding how their enemies fought. The aliens were incredibly advanced, but Wright had noticed something important during his studies. Their technology was rigid. A Zephyrian weapon had one function, performed perfectly. Their ships followed predetermined patterns. Their tactics never varied from proven methods. Humans, on the other hand, were adaptable. They took cruise ships and turned them into warships. They used mining equipment to fight battles. They survived in places no species was meant to live. "Chief Wright, you need to see this," his assistant, Dr. Sarah Kim, called from across the workshop. She was examining a piece of Zephyrian computer core they'd pulled from a wreck. Wright walked over to her station. "What is it?" "I've been analyzing their command protocols. Look at this code structure. Every order has to be confirmed by a central authority before execution. Every tactical decision goes through a chain of command that traces back to their home worlds." Wright frowned, studying the data. "That would cause delays in combat situations." "Exactly. But more than that, if we could somehow disrupt their command network, their ships wouldn't know what to do. They'd be paralyzed." Wright felt a cold smile spread across his face. "How many people know about this?" "Just us so far. Keep it that way. I need to think about this." Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka crawled through the maintenance tunnels of the Golden Dreams, checking the ship's life support systems. She was small enough to fit in spaces where the repair robots couldn't reach, and she knew every bolt and wire in the ship better than she knew her own face. The ship was dying slowly. They all were. Metal fatigue from constant jumping between systems, overloaded processors from running beyond safe limits, jury-rigged repairs using parts that were never meant to work together. The fleet had been running for 20 years, and it showed. But humans were good at making broken things work. "Tanaka, report to the bridge." Elena's voice came through the comm system. Yuki sighed and began crawling back toward the main corridor. She found Elena in her ready room, staring at a holographic display showing the approaching Zephyrian forces. "How bad is our situation?" Elena asked without looking up. "We can jump, but barely. The hyperdrive needs a complete overhaul, and we're running on emergency power reserves. Half the fleet is in the same condition." Elena nodded grimly. "Wright wants to try something crazy. He thinks he's found a weakness in their command structure." "How crazy are we talking?" "He wants to capture one of their ships intact." Yuki laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Captain, with respect, that's not crazy. That's suicide." The plan Wright proposed was indeed insane. A small team would use a modified cargo shuttle to approach one of the smaller Zephyrian scout ships. They would disable its engines and communications, then board it during the confusion. If Wright was right about their rigid command structure, the ship's crew wouldn't know how to react to an unexpected boarding action. "The key is surprise," Wright explained to the assembled ship captains via video link. "They've conquered hundreds of species, but they've always fought conventional battles. They don't expect their enemies to ram shuttles through their hull." Commander Park shook his head. "James, this is madness. Even if we capture the ship, what then? We can't fight their entire fleet." "We don't fight them," Wright replied. "We study them. We learn everything we can about their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. Then we disappear again and plan our next move." Captain Martinez of the cargo hauler Perseverance spoke up. "And who exactly is going on the suicide mission?" Wright smiled coldly. "I am, along with anyone else crazy enough to volunteer." The volunteers were exactly who Elena expected: the desperate, the angry, and the hopeless. Combat veterans who had lost everything in the fall of Earth. Engineers who were tired of running. Young people who had never known anything but life in the fleet and wanted to fight back. Elena found herself volunteering too, despite every rational thought in her head telling her not to. She had been running for 20 years. Maybe it was time to turn around and bare her teeth. The boarding operation began as the Zephyrian hunter squadrons entered the system. Wright's shuttle, the Angry Wasp, launched from the Golden Dreams and flew directly toward the nearest enemy scout ship. To the aliens, it looked like a desperate escape attempt, a single small vessel trying to flee the trap. They were wrong. The Wasp slammed into the Zephyrian ship's hull at maximum velocity, its reinforced nose punching through the alien armor like a bullet through paper. The impact killed the shuttle's engines and probably should have killed its crew. But humans had learned to build things tough. Wright kicked open the shuttle's airlock and found himself face to face with his first live Zephyrian. The alien was tall and thin with blue-gray skin and large black eyes. It stared at him in complete shock as if it couldn't believe what was happening. Wright shot it with a jury-rigged energy weapon and kept moving. The boarding action lasted 17 minutes. The Zephyrian crew, trained for space combat, had no idea how to fight enemies inside their own ship. They kept trying to call for orders from their commanders, but Wright's team had cut their communications first thing. When it was over, Wright stood on the bridge of humanity's first captured alien vessel. Around him, human engineers were already beginning to study every system, every piece of technology, every scrap of data they could find. "This is just the beginning," Wright told Elena over the comm. "Now we start learning how to hurt them." The Exodus fleet scattered into deep space once again, but this time they carried something new: hope. The Zephyrians had thought humans would eventually give up and beg for mercy. Instead, humanity had just begun to evolve into something their enemies had never encountered before, a species that learned from its defeats and came back stronger. Agent Marcus Cole adjusted his false identification badge and walked through the security checkpoint at Zephyrian Trade Station Omega 7. To anyone watching, he looked like just another human slave trader, one of the few humans the aliens allowed to move freely through their space. The Zephyrians found it useful to have humans who could communicate with the scattered refugee populations they occasionally captured. What they didn't know was that Marcus had never sold a single human to the aliens. Instead, he spent his time mapping their empire, studying their weaknesses and building a network of contacts that stretched across 3 spiral arms. "Trader Cole," the Zephyrian customs officer said in broken English. "Purpose of visit?" "Routine business," Marcus replied, keeping his voice humble and subservient. The regional governor requested a report on human settlements in Sector 7. The alien stamped his papers without really looking at them. Marcus had learned that the Zephyrians were incredibly arrogant. They couldn't imagine that a primitive human might be smart enough to fool them. They were wrong about that, too. Marcus made his way to the station's commercial district, where he had arranged to meet with Dr. Sarah Kim. She had infiltrated Zephyrian space 2 years ago, posing as a xenobiology researcher studying human adaptation to different environments. Her real job was to map the alien communication networks and find ways to disrupt them. They met in a crowded alien marketplace, just 2 humans discussing trade routes while the galaxy's conquerors walked past them without a second glance. "What's your status?" Marcus asked quietly, pretending to examine some alien fruits. "Better than expected," Sarah whispered back. "I've identified 17 major communication hubs and 43 secondary nodes. The whole network is centralized through their crown worlds. If we could disrupt the main hubs simultaneously, their empire would be deaf and blind," Marcus finished. "How long would it take to plan such an operation?" 5 years minimum. We'd need people inside every major facility." Marcus nodded. "We have people. The question is whether we can keep them alive long enough to get into position." Chief Saboteur Anna Petrov crouched in the maintenance shaft of Zephyrian military base Kappa 12, carefully attaching a small device to the main power conduit. The device was her own invention, a feedback loop generator that would cause random power fluctuations throughout the base. Nothing dramatic, just enough to slowly degrade their equipment over time. Anna had been doing this for 3 years now, moving from facility to facility and leaving small surprises behind. A navigation computer that would develop targeting errors after 6 months of use, a life support system that would gradually lose efficiency, communication arrays that would suffer from increasing static interference. Individually, each sabotage was too small to notice. Together, they were slowly rotting the Zephyrian war machine from within. The aliens never suspected systematic sabotage because humans weren't supposed to be smart enough for such sophisticated operations. They blamed the failures on equipment aging or poor maintenance. They never thought to look for the small human woman who cleaned their floors and repaired their machines. Anna finished installing the device and crawled back through the maintenance shaft. Tomorrow she would move to the next base, leaving behind another small gift for the Empire that had destroyed her home. Dr. Wright sat in his laboratory aboard the fleet's new command ship, studying data from dozens of infiltration missions. Over the past 5 years, human agents had penetrated deep into Zephyrian space, gathering intelligence and identifying weaknesses. What they had discovered was revolutionary. The Zephyrian hegemony wasn't the united empire it appeared to be. It was held together by fear, bureaucracy, and the threat of overwhelming force. Subject species throughout the empire still harbored resentment against their conquerors. Many of them would rebel if they thought they had a chance of success. More importantly, the Zephyrians themselves were divided. Different factions within their government competed for resources and status. Their military commanders often disagreed with civilian leadership. The Empire was strong but not united. "It's like a house of cards," Wright told Elena during one of their regular strategy meetings. "Pull out the right supports and the whole structure comes crashing down." Elena studied the intelligence reports Wright had compiled. "What kind of supports are we talking about?" "Communication networks, supply chains, command hierarchies. The Zephyrians rule through control of information. If we can cut their communication lines and disrupt their supply routes simultaneously, their local commanders will be isolated and confused. And while they're trying to figure out what's happening," Wright smiled coldly, "we hit their crown worlds, the 7 systems at the heart of their empire that have never seen war. We show them what humans learned during our 20 years in the void." Agent Cole stood in the throne room of Zephyrian Viceroy Karseth, maintaining the humble posture expected of a human servant, while mentally cataloging every detail of the room's layout. He had been summoned to provide a report on human refugee populations in the outer sectors. The scattered human groups continued to decline. He lied smoothly. Most are barely surviving on marginal worlds or dying in space. Within another generation, they will likely extinct themselves through starvation and disease. Viceroy Karseth nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I was beginning to worry that their initial resistance indicated a more resilient species than we assumed." "No, Your Excellence. Humans are emotional creatures. Without their homeworld to anchor them psychologically, they have lost the will to survive as a species." The Viceroy dismissed him with a wave, never suspecting that the humble human standing before him had just provided crucial intelligence about the throne room's defenses to a network of saboteurs spread throughout the galaxy. As Cole left the palace, he activated a small transmitter hidden in his sleeve. The signal would take months to reach its destination, but when it did, it would add one more piece to the vast puzzle Wright was assembling. Anna Petrov stood in the ruins of Zephyrian Supply Depot Beta 9, admiring her handiwork. The explosion had been perfectly timed, occurring during shift change when the facility was nearly empty, minimizing alien casualties while completely destroying 3 months' worth of military supplies destined for the outer sectors. The Zephyrians would blame it on an industrial accident. They would never suspect that a human maintenance worker had spent 6 months carefully weakening structural supports and rerouting fuel lines to create the perfect conditions for catastrophic failure. Similar accidents were occurring throughout Zephyrian space with increasing frequency, food shipments spoiling due to contaminated preservatives, weapon factories shutting down because of faulty power systems, transport ships developing mysterious engine problems. The aliens were beginning to notice the pattern, but they couldn't understand it. How could a scattered, broken species coordinate such sophisticated sabotage operations across thousands of light years? The answer was simple. Humans had learned patience. They had learned to think in terms of years and decades rather than days and weeks. Most importantly, they had learned to hate with the cold precision of a machine. Wright reviewed the latest reports from his network of agents and saboteurs. The pieces were finally falling into place. Communication hubs mapped. Supply lines identified. Key facilities infiltrated. Political divisions documented. The Zephyrian hegemony thought they had conquered humanity 30 years ago. Instead, they had created their own worst nightmare. A species with nothing left to lose, unlimited time to plan, and the desperate creativity that comes from absolute hatred. "Send word to all cells," Wright ordered his communications officer. "Operation Homecoming is approved. Begin final preparations." Throughout Zephyrian space, human agents received coded messages disguised as routine trade communications. Anna Petrov packed her demolition charges. Marcus Cole made final notes on command center layouts. Sarah Kim prepared to upload viruses into communication networks. After 30 years of running and hiding, humanity was about to remind the galaxy why humans had once been considered dangerous, enough to conquer in the first place. The Zephyrians were about to learn that there's a difference between defeating humans and destroying them. They had accomplished the first but failed at the second. That failure was about to cost them everything. The first strike came at exactly 800 hours, Galactic Standard Time, across 47 different star systems. Anna Petrov's demolition charges destroyed the main communication hub for the entire western spiral arm at the same moment that Marcus Cole's infiltration team took control of the Central Command facility on Zephyr Station Alpha. High Admiral Zarketh was in his private chambers when the alarms began blaring throughout his flagship. He rushed to the bridge to find his communications officer staring at a display filled with red warning lights. "Report," Zarketh ordered. "Sir, we're receiving distress signals from multiple sectors. Communication failures, supply depot explosions, base blackouts. The reports are coming in faster than we can process them." Zarketh studied the tactical display with growing alarm. The attacks weren't random. They were coordinated, targeting specific facilities across the Empire with surgical precision. "How many facilities have been hit?" "At last count, over 300 separate incidents, sir. And the number keeps growing." This was impossible. The scattered human refugees didn't have the resources or organization for such massive coordinated strikes. "Unless, get me a direct line to Viceroy Karseth," Zarketh ordered. "We need to—" The communication attempt failed. The relay stations that would normally carry his message had been destroyed in the first wave of attacks. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching her fleet emerge from hyperspace in the Proxima Zephyr system. Around her, 1,000 human ships of every size and description prepared for battle, cargo haulers bristling with improvised weapons, mining ships converted into missile platforms, old passenger liners now serving as troop transports. They looked nothing like a proper military fleet. They looked like exactly what they were: desperate refugees who had spent 30 years learning how to turn anything into a weapon. "All ships, this is Elena Vasquez," she broadcast on the command frequency. "Today we stop running. Today we show them what humans do to those who take our homes." The Zephyrian defense fleet at Proxima Zephyr was caught completely off guard. They had been trying to re-establish communication with High Command when human ships began appearing throughout the system. The alien commanders followed standard doctrine, forming defensive formations and calling for reinforcements. The reinforcements never came. The communication networks were down. The supply ships carrying ammunition and replacement parts were burning wrecks. The carefully planned defense strategies that had worked for 1,000 years suddenly meant nothing. Elena's fleet didn't fight like any enemy the Zephyrians had ever encountered. Human ships rammed alien vessels at full speed, their crews screaming battle cries as they died. Boarding parties armed with improvised weapons stormed enemy ships through holes blown in the hull. Fighter pilots flew burning aircraft into Zephyrian command bridges. It wasn't military tactics. It was fury given form. Dr. Wright monitored the battle from his command ship, analyzing the performance of human forces against Zephyrian defenses. The aliens were better trained and better equipped, but they were also confused and afraid. Their rigid command structure was collapsing without central coordination. "Phase 2 is a go," Wright announced. "Deploy the special packages." Throughout the battle zone, human ships began launching what looked like escape pods towards Zephyrian vessels. The aliens, following standard protocols, tried to capture the pods to interrogate the survivors inside. They discovered too late that the pods contained bombs. The nuclear devices had been built from salvaged reactor cores and armed with deadman switches. When the pods were brought aboard Zephyrian ships, they detonated, crippling or destroying vessels from within. It was a tactic that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Humans no longer cared about civilized warfare. On the Zephyrian homeworld of Zephyr Prime, Viceroy Karseth paced frantically in his throne room. Reports were flooding in from across the Empire. Human attacks in dozens of systems, communication networks failing. "Military bases going dark, how is this possible?" he demanded of his advisors. "The humans are scattered refugees. They don't have the ships or soldiers for such an operation." His military commander, General Torvek, studied the tactical reports with growing unease. "My lord, the attacks are too coordinated to be random. Someone has been planning this for years. The humans we thought were harmless traders and researchers. They may have been scouts and saboteurs." Karseth felt ice form in his stomach. "Are you telling me that for 30 years we've been allowing enemy agents to move freely through our empire?" "It appears so, my lord." The viceroy sank into his throne. The humans had fooled them completely. While the Zephyrians had been congratulating themselves on their easy conquest, humanity had been infiltrating their empire and mapping their weaknesses with the patience of a species that had Learn to think in generations rather than years, Agent. Marcus Cole stood in the central command facility of Zephyr Station Alpha, watching human technicians work to extract data from alien computer systems. Around him, Zephyrian personnel lay unconscious from the stun weapons his team had used during their assault. "Status report," he said into his communicator. "We have complete access to their tactical databases." Dr. Sarah Kim reported from her position at the main computer terminal. "Fleet positions, supply routes, command hierarchies, everything." Marcus smiled grimly. "Download it all and prepare for extraction. We've got 5 minutes before their security forces arrive. The data they were stealing would be priceless. With complete knowledge of Zephyrian military dispositions, human forces could strike at will while avoiding enemy strongholds. The aliens' own intelligence network was being turned against them. As they prepared to leave, Marcus made one final transmission to the unconscious alien commander. "Tell your leaders this is just the beginning. You took our home. Now we're taking yours." The Battle of Proxima Zephyr lasted 18 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian defense fleet. Human losses were severe. Nearly half of Elena's ships were destroyed or crippled, but the strategic victory was overwhelming. More importantly, the battle had been broadcast across human communication networks throughout the galaxy. For the first time in 30 years, scattered human refugees saw their enemies bleeding. They saw Zephyrian ships burning. They saw that the mighty hegemony could be hurt. Rebellions began erupting on occupied worlds as other alien species saw their chance for freedom. The Altarian resistance, crushed 200 years ago, suddenly emerged from hiding with human weapons and advisors. The Vegan colonies declared independence and requested human military support. Dr. Wright watched the tactical reports pour in from across the galaxy. The plan was working better than he had dared hope. The Zephyrian Empire was fracturing as subject species threw off their chains and local commanders found themselves isolated and outnumbered. But the real prize still lay ahead. "Signal the fleet," Wright ordered. "Set course for the Crown Worlds. It's time to pay our respects to the hegemony's leadership." High Admiral Zarketh stared at the holographic display showing the approaching human fleet. Intelligence reports indicated they were heading directly for Zephyr Prime, the heart of the Empire. It was an impossible target, the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, but then everything the humans had done in the past month had been impossible. "Prepare all defenses," he ordered. "Recall every available ship to protect the homeworld. And send word to the Crown Council. Tell them the humans are coming." The message was simple, but it carried implications that chilled every Zephyrian leader who received it. For 1,000 years, the Crown Worlds had been untouchable. Now, for the first time in their history, they faced the possibility of enemy ships in their home systems. The war that had begun with humanity's defeat was about to end at the very heart of the Zephyrian Empire. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr Prime system, like a swarm of angry wasps. 3,000 ships of every size and description, held together by determination and 30 years of accumulated rage. At their head flew the UHS Remembrance, a massive vessel built from the wreckage of humanity's greatest ships and commanded by a man the Zephyrians thought was dead. Admiral Marcus Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship, older and grayer than when Earth had fallen, but with eyes that burned with unquenched fire. His artificial heart beat steadily in his chest, a replacement for the one that had given out during the dark years of exile. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Defense Fleet," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." High Admiral Zarketh's face appeared on the main screen. The alien leader looked older than Torres remembered, his blue-gray skin marked with the stress lines of a commander facing an impossible situation. "Admiral Torres," Zarketh said, his voice carefully controlled. "I was told you died years ago." "I got better," Torres replied coldly. "You have something that belongs to us." "And what is that?" "Justice." Zarketh leaned forward in his command chair. "You cannot hope to win this battle, Torres. This system contains our most powerful defense fleets. Our orbital platforms alone have enough firepower to destroy your entire force." Torres smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You're probably right. But here's the thing about humans, Zarketh. We don't need to win. We just need to make you pay. The transmission cut off and Torres turned to his tactical officer. Begin the assault. The battle for Zephyr Prime began with the most audacious opening move in military history. Rather than attacking the heavily defended outer planets, Torres sent his fastest ships directly at Zephyr Prime itself, using the system's own asteroid belt as cover. Meanwhile, his main force engaged the defense fleets in a series of hit-and-run attacks designed to confuse and divide the enemy response. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded one of the strike groups hitting the orbital defense platforms around Zephyr Prime. Her ship, the Golden Dreams, had been rebuilt so many times that almost nothing remained of the original luxury liner. It was now a weapon of war crewed by people who had spent their entire adult lives learning to hate. Target the primary power coupling, she ordered as her ship dove between two massive Zephyrian platforms. All weapons, continuous fire. The Golden Dreams shuddered under alien fire, but Elena's crew kept their weapons trained on the target. Around them, other human ships flew suicide runs against installations that had never been attacked in their 1,000-year history. They died by the dozens, but each death bought time and created confusion in the alien defense network. High Admiral Zarketh watched his perfect defenses crumble under human assault. The attacks made no tactical sense. The humans were throwing away ships and lives to achieve objectives that any rational species would consider worthless. But somehow the cumulative effect was devastating. Sir, Platform 7 is reporting massive system failures, his aide reported. They're requesting permission to evacuate non-essential personnel. Denied. All platforms will hold their positions. Sir, Platform 12 has gone dark. We've lost contact with the entire installation. Zarketh stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His defenses were failing, not because the humans were stronger, but because they were willing to die in ways that his people couldn't understand or counter. Dr. Wright commanded the stealth insertion team that had infiltrated Zephyr Prime's surface during the chaos of the orbital battle, using technology stolen from the aliens over 30 years of warfare. His small force had landed near the planetary capital and was now fighting their way toward the Crown Council chambers. The Zephyrians had never faced ground combat on their homeworld. Their security forces were trained for riot control and ceremonial duties, not war. They broke and ran when faced with human soldiers who had spent their entire lives learning to fight with whatever weapons they could find. Remember, we want prisoners, Wright told his team as they advanced through the capital city's streets. The galaxy needs to see their leaders answer for what they did to Earth. The final assault on the Crown Council building lasted 6 hours. Zephyrian troops fought desperately to protect their government, but they were facing an enemy that had been shaped by 30 years of exile and loss. Human soldiers who had watched their families die in the void. Engineers who had spent decades keeping broken ships running through pure hatred. Children who had been born in the dark between stars and raised on stories of their stolen home. When Wright's team finally broke into the Crown Council chamber, they found Viceroy Karseth and 6 other Zephyrian leaders huddled behind an overturned table. Armed with ceremonial weapons they barely knew how to use. Surrender, Wright said simply. It's over. Karseth looked up at the human standing over him, a man who had once been a peaceful scientist but had been transformed into something terrible by loss and rage. What do you want? I want Earth back. I want every human slave freed. I want reparations for 30 years of murder and exile. Wright's voice was calm, almost conversational. But mostly I want you to understand something. What? You could have left us alone. You had 17 galaxies. You didn't need our small corner of space. But you came anyway, because you thought we were weak. Wright gestured toward the window where smoke from the burning city rose into the alien sky. In orbit above, Zephyrian defense platforms were still exploding under human assault. Do we look weak to you now? Admiral Torres stood in the ruins of High Command as Zephyrian officers surrendered their weapons. Around him, human Marines secured the facility, while technicians began downloading the enemy's complete military database. After 30 years of war, they finally had access to everything. Fleet positions, supply routes, command codes, even the locations of other human survivors scattered throughout the galaxy. Sir, we're receiving surrender offers from 17 different Zephyrian fleet commanders, his communications officer reported. They're requesting terms. Torres looked out at the burning orbital platforms and the wreckage of what had once been the galaxy's most powerful defense network. 3,000 human ships had attacked the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. Less than 1,000 were still capable of flight. By any rational measure, it should have been a disaster. Instead, it was the most complete victory in human history. "Tell them our terms are simple," Torres said. "Complete withdrawal from all human systems. Release of all human prisoners. Reparations to be paid over the next 50 years. And one more thing, sir. They will remember what happened here. They will remember that humans don't forgive and we don't forget. And if they ever threaten us again, we won't just take their capital. We'll take their entire civilization apart piece by piece." 6 months later, Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the restored bridge of an Earth orbital station, looking down at the blue-green world that humanity had lost 3 decades earlier. The planet was healing from the occupation, and human colonists were returning from the scattered refugee fleets. But Elena knew that humanity itself had changed during their long exile. They had learned things about warfare, about patience, about the cold mathematics of revenge that would have horrified their ancestors. The species that had once built cruise ships and explored the stars had become something harder, more dangerous. "Do you think we'll ever be the same?" asked Captain Martinez, who had served with her throughout the war. Elena watched construction ships rebuilding Earth's defenses, but these weren't the peaceful installations of the old days. These were fortresses designed by people who had learned that the universe was full of predators. "No," she said quietly, "we'll never be the same, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." Throughout the galaxy, other species watched the human victory with a mixture of awe and fear. The Zephyrian hegemony, which had seemed invincible for 1,000 years, had been brought to its knees by refugees with improvised weapons and an absolute refusal to surrender. The message was clear to every would-be conqueror in the galaxy. Humans were no longer the peaceful explorers they had once been. They had become something far more dangerous, a species that remembered every wrong, planned for generations, and would cross the universe itself to balance the scales. In the darkness between stars, other human fleets were already beginning to explore beyond known space, carrying with them the hard-won knowledge of their victory. They would find new worlds, meet new species, and spread the story of what happened when humanity fought back. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, potential enemies would hear that story and decide that maybe, just maybe, they had better things to do than pick a fight with the species that had learned to turn suffering into strength and exile into the foundation of an empire that would span the stars. The war was over. Humanity had won, but more importantly, they had ensured that no one would ever again make the mistake of thinking humans were weak.